Welcome back to the Benchwarmer and a Brew podcast. I am the Benchwarmer. I'm the host, Josh Johnson. And today, the brew we have is Foothills Brewing IPA, India Pale Ale. We've got that one over there. We've got Festival Express. I'm usually not a big IPA fan, but today I decided, you know what? I'm just going to get an IPA. I don't know why. I don't know what got into me, but I picked up an IPA. So it is very much like your typical run-of-the-mill IPA. Super hoppy. Got some fruit notes in there. I think there's a little bit of a barley wheat kind of taste in there as well. Really solid IPA. So today we're just going to jump right into it. The first topic I have today is something that was a little bit interesting that happened the past couple of days, and I don't know, it was very odd. We've had several coaches getting hired in recent past couple of weeks, actually, and I think it's gone a little bit differently than a lot of us thought it would. Going into the offseason, I think a lot of people were very high on Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator Brian Daboll and the Kansas City Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy. And so far, neither one of them have been hired. Now, part of that, I think, has to do with the fact that their teams are still in the playoffs. The Bills and Chiefs are going to play tomorrow in the AFC Championship game. And from what I can tell, neither one have been focusing too much on life after the playoffs. So Eric Bieniemy he's interviewed with the Houston Texans, but he has not interviewed in several other job openings. So it's very interesting, but neither one of them have been hired. But there was one coach that was hired by the Detroit Lions. They hired out of nowhere, it seemed. They hired Dan Campbell. He was a former interim coach with the Miami Dolphins in 2015, and he had an extremely odd press conference. I think there's something to be said for a press conference going forward. You know, a press conference signifies what life will be like with that coach as the coach. And I think we've seen that before. We saw that with Adam Gase when he was introduced in his introductory presser with the New York Jets. It was very odd. He looked very bug-eyed. He turned into a meme. And then they were terrible. And he's now a meme for how awful of a coach he is. So I don't know if there's a correlation to be made there, but I think having an odd press conference definitely starts things off on the wrong foot. And Dan Campbell had a very weird press conference. He said in that press conference, I'm just going to read the quote. He said, "Here's what I do know. It's that this team is going to take on the identity of this city. This city's been down, and it found a way to get up. It's found a way to overcome adversity, so this team's going to be built on, we're going to kick you in the teeth. And when you punch us back, we're going to smile at you. And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off. And we're going to stand up, and it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap. And we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing." Weird. That is, we're going to take a kneecap on our way up. And then after you punch us twice, we're going to take another kneecap on the... What? What? First of all, the press conference aside, I mean, that is a very odd quote. I think he also quoted The Big Lebowski in his press conference, which is just weird. I think as a coach, you want your press conference to be emblematic of what your tenure as a coach is going to actually be like. And Dan Campbell said, we're going to punch you in the face and bite your kneecaps. Okay. That's all fine and good. You know, he's going to be a culture changer, I guess, and he's going to really push workman mentality with his football team. But I don't know. Did he drink before that press conference? It sounded like he had consumed some beverages. I'm baffled by that. But I think the bigger question mark here is not what he said in his press conference, but why the Detroit Lions hired him in the first place, considering there are several coaching options out there that I think are much, much better hires than Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell was an interim coach with the Miami Dolphins in 2015, and they did not hire him as their full-time coach. Funnily enough, they hired Adam Gase. Um, he flamed out in his only job as a head coach. He went 5-7 with the Miami Dolphins, and I remember that they were much tougher after he took over in week 4, but it was not enough. There wasn't anything there that said he could be a head coach moving forward, and he hasn't gotten a job since. As far as I know, he hasn't been a coordinator since. He hasn't done much of anything since 2015, and somehow got the Detroit Lions head coaching job. I don't think that's a good move. I don't know why the Lions hired him. He did not show me anything that says this is a great head coaching candidate. And I think every year there's quite a few busts on the head coaching market, and I think Dan Campbell will be the next one. Something else that happened over the past week, actually 2 days ago, was that former Washington football team first-round pick Dwayne Haskins was signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers to a 1-year deal, and this was very interesting. I think mostly this was interesting because it told me that the Pittsburgh Steelers are not planning on drafting a quarterback in this year's draft. That is very odd to me, considering the only weakness I felt like from the Steelers, other than perhaps dropping passes, was the quarterback position. Ben Roethlisberger down the stretch was poor. He was very bad. He was not good in their playoff game against the Cleveland Browns. He threw 4 interceptions. I think you can make an argument that Big Ben was the main reason why they lost that playoff game. Now, he threw for a bajillion yards, but when you're down a bajillion points, you throw for a bajillion yards trying to get back into it. He was not very good down the stretch, and their offense overall was not very good down the stretch. The first 11 games of the season, they were rolling, they were humming, they were doing pretty solid, but towards the end of the year, they weren't very good. And I think we've seen that with some other aging quarterbacks as well. We've seen Drew Brees the past couple of years starting to fade towards the end of the season. Maybe his arm just doesn't have that same whip to it that it would have at the beginning of a season off of an off season. Big Ben, to me, is not an answer even next year for the Steelers. I think that they need a long-term option in that building, and I think they feel that perhaps they have addressed that with the signing of Dwayne Haskins. Dwayne Haskins was a former first-round pick just 3 years ago now, of the Washington football team, coming out of Ohio State. He had thrown for 5,000 yards in his one season starting at Ohio State, and he seemed like he has the measurables of a quarterback in the NFL. He's big, he's strong, he's got a cannon of an arm. He had the physical tools that says, okay, this kid could be a great starting quarterback in the NFL. There was one slight problem, though, with Dwayne Haskins. He has not shown an ability to work like an NFL quarterback. Dwayne Haskins has had several issues over the past couple of years. Namely, this year, he had many COVID breaches, COVID issues, where he'd be caught in public not wearing a mask, and he would have to be out and quarantine, and that's not a good look from your starting quarterback. You want your starting quarterback to be businesslike. You want them to be focused on the game of football. You don't want them to worry about things outside of the football field. Dwayne Haskins showed an inability to do that, and when he did play, he looked incredibly unprepared and was not showing the poise that you would want out of a first-round quarterback. I think the best example of this was after Dwayne Haskins was released by the Washington football team this past year, they started Taylor Heineke at quarterback in their playoff game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Taylor Heineke looked better in that one game than Dwayne Haskins did at any point in his 2-year stint with the Washington football team. And I think that's a massive indictment on Dwayne Haskins, as, that's a terrible look when an undrafted quarterback who couldn't even start in the XFL looks better than a first-round pick at quarterback. It shows that Dwayne Haskins was never fully prepared. He was always underprepared, and it showed that he didn't have the mentality to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. He seems like a B-level Jamarcus Russell to me so far from what I've seen from his first couple of years in the NFL. He's got the physical traits, but he's never shown the ability to work and be prepared to be the starting quarterback in the NFL. It'll be interesting to see how he does in Pittsburgh, because he's not going to get any help from Ben Roethlisberger. It's been noted that Big Ben is not interested in helping his backup quarterbacks. He's not worried about them. They don't exist in his world. He's worried about himself and what he is going to do on Sunday, and he's been known to not give tips or pointers to his backups. And frankly, it's not his prerogative to do so, but he had that. Dwayne Haskins had that in Washington with Alex Smith, who helped Patrick Mahomes when he was in Kansas City, and I would assume also did the same thing with Dwayne Haskins in Washington. So Dwayne Haskins is not going to get that help, that tutoring that he would have gotten in Washington, and he's going to have to be prepared. Backup quarterbacks get cut when they're not prepared. Their job isn't to start on Sundays necessarily unless a quarterback is hurt. Their job is to prepare the starter to be good to go on Sundays. Their job is to study film to know exactly what the other team that coming Sunday is going to present to your offense. They got to drill the starting quarterback. Their job is to be prepared to help the starter be prepared on Sundays. And that was the one thing that Dwayne Haskins showed he was not able to do when he was in Washington. That said, he is going to Pittsburgh, which is a very interesting situation for Dwayne Haskins. He's not going to get the help that he would have gotten in Washington, I don't think, but he's going to an organization that might have patience with him. And it could be a good thing, but it could also be a bad thing. He's going to at least be on that roster all of next season, which is perhaps something that would not have happened had he gone to a different organization. But also, I don't think he's going to get the tutoring or the patience that he would have gotten in Washington, because he was a first-round pick in Washington. And even then, he only lasted 2 years, which is unheard of for a first-round pick at quarterback. He did tweet something out 2 days ago, Dwayne Haskins did, which I found very interesting, and I think is the correct mentality that Dwayne needs to adopt going forward. He needs to adopt that resurgent workman type of mantra going forward. He's going to have to redeem his image, but he's also going to have to regain the trust of the National Football League. The NFL has no trust in Dwayne Haskins. We saw that when he cleared waivers. If there was something that another NFL team thought, we need this guy, he wouldn't have cleared waivers, but he did. This perhaps could be his last opportunity to be a quarterback in the NFL. But what he tweeted was 3 in the Bible, talking about his new number. He's going to wear number 3 in Pittsburgh. He says 3 in the Bible stands for restoration and eternal life. Let's work. Now that's very interesting to me, because Dwayne has shown contrition after he was cut by Washington, and he said that he needs to turn his life around, which is that's exactly what you want to hear. But what remains to be seen is it true for Dwayne? Is that actually what he believes? Another thing that happened in the past couple days that I found very interesting, and also I think the next moment in a series of question marks in Houston. The Houston Texans interviewed former quarterback in the NFL, Josh McCown. And I think this kind of shows the depths that Houston has gone to try and get somebody who would be interested in being the coach in Houston. It's been well documented that Deshaun Watson does not want to be the quarterback in Houston, or at least has shown an extreme unhappiness being the quarterback in Houston. It seems that they're a very poor run organization in the NFL. They have a pastor as their head of football operations down there, which makes no sense. And, I work at a church for my 9 to 5 job, so I have nothing against pastors. In fact, I work with a pastor closely, but I don't think any pastor is trained or knows how to run an NFL football team. There's more to being the person who's in charge of football operations than pastoral care. They're two very different things. It does not mix. And Jack Easterby is that person in Houston. So they have interviewed Eric Bieniemy, and I think that would be the best move for Houston to make. The problem is, if Deshaun Watson doesn't want to be there anymore, Eric Bieniemy should just stay in Kansas City, and I think he will, because Houston is an awful head coaching opening right now. Maybe if you would have asked us a month ago, that would not necessarily be the case, but since the issues with Deshaun Watson have arisen, and he's the only bright spot on that roster, that is not a good job opening. And it has gotten so bad that they have interviewed Josh McCown, who, as just a few years ago, when asked about the possibility of coaching, said, well, I don't know, but I've thought about it. It seems like it could be something I could do. That's not what you want in Houston, but that's how bad it's gotten that they have interviewed Josh McCown for their head coach opening down there in Houston. I think it's only going to get worse. And this is a sign that it is continuing to get worse. And until they straighten out these issues with Deshaun Watson or get a haul in return for him in a trade, it's not going to get any better. And as long as this Deshaun Watson cloud hovers over Houston, they're in effect screwed. And they did it to themselves. Now, there's one last thing that I want to touch on in this episode, and I don't talk about basketball a ton. I think I'm a little bit more interested in football, but the Brooklyn Nets, who have assembled a super team about a week ago, they traded for James Harden from the Houston Rockets. So now they have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. And this week, they finally debuted that threesome against the Cleveland Cavaliers twice. Kyrie Irving had been gone for personal issues for a couple weeks, and many were even wondering if he wanted to play the game of basketball again. But he's back, and James Harden is in a Brooklyn Nets uniform, and Kevin Durant is also in a Brooklyn Nets uniform. And the second coming of the Heatles was here, except it wasn't. And Brooklyn lost twice to the Cleveland Cavaliers this week. They lost the first game in overtime, 147-135, where Colin Sexton had 20 points in overtime, had 42 for the game, and the Brooklyn Nets allowed Cleveland to score 147 points. Cleveland, perhaps one of the worst run organizations outside of their years with LeBron James ever. They are a wreck. And Cleveland beat Brooklyn twice this week. They beat them a second time, 125-113, with no Kevin Durant. Brooklyn played with Kyrie Irving and James Harden and the rest of the roster, but Kevin Durant took the night off, and they still lost, showing that it wasn't a fluke that they lost to Cleveland the first time. I think if you play a team twice in the same week and lose to them twice, it's less of a fluke than if you would have lost to them just once. It shows that you could not make an adjustment to what Cleveland was doing and also couldn't defend anything. You can't allow 147 and 125 points in back-to-back games and expect anyone to think you're going to be a title contender out of the East. I think this week showed that until something drastic happens, Brooklyn is going to play second fiddle to Milwaukee or Philadelphia out of the East. I think the first game, the 147-135 loss, was less surprising to me because it takes time for a big three to gel. It took the Miami Heat quite a few games. It took them about 30 games or so to finally get into a groove back when they were together. it takes these groups of star players a while to figure out what the other player needs out of a system, when to pick spots, when to shoot, when to pass. It takes a minute for those kind of habits to develop. But there's one thing that I've noticed when these players have played together for Brooklyn that is concerning. First off, Kyrie Irving, I think, needs to be traded for anything. He is a detriment to the Brooklyn Nets. He can't guard anyone, for starters. He cannot guard anyone. Kyrie Irving is a liability on the defensive end of the floor. And I don't think that's a bad thing on many teams, because most teams would be able to cover that up with other players. But on Brooklyn, they don't have anybody to cover it up. DeAndre Jordan is their ball stopper on defense. Kevin Durant is the only reliable defender on the Brooklyn Nets. And when he doesn't play, they lose. When he does play, they lose because they can't stop anyone. And I think Kyrie Irving has a lot to do with that, because the NBA is a guard-dominated league. We saw that with Colin Sexton when he dropped 42 on Kyrie Irving's head. The NBA is guard-dominant, and when your guards can't guard theirs, you lose. So Brooklyn has an issue with defense, which is fine because they have James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving. They can outscore everyone, except they can't, because they allowed Cleveland to score 147 points, and 135 wasn't enough to win. And then they followed it up by allowing Cleveland to score 125 points, and 113 wasn't enough to win. So they've got a defensive issue that they have got to figure out. And I think they do that by trading Kyrie Irving for role players. They need 3-and-D role players and a rim protector. DeAndre Jordan is not the answer as a rim protector moving forward, and they need players that can score but also defend. A Robert Covington, a Lonzo Ball type player that is going to give you defense to guard other people's guards. When they play Portland, they're going to get cooked. When they play Boston, they're going to get cooked. When they play the Lakers, they'll get cooked. When they play fill in the blank, Cleveland, they're going to get cooked by Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. Now, the second game, it showed something else that is wrong with Kyrie Irving that is also an issue for Brooklyn moving forward. It wasn't necessarily his defense. 125 is bad, but okay, I won't pick on his defense again. But he did do something that I also found concerning. Kyrie Irving scored 38 points. And you're going to say, Josh, what are you talking about? He scored 38 points. That's amazing. It's not, because James Harden scored 19. And that is concerning because James Harden is a much better offensive player than Kyrie Irving. He is a much better all-around player than Kyrie Irving. He is a better point guard than Kyrie Irving. He's better at everything than Kyrie Irving. He's a better defender, a better scorer, a better passer, a better leader. And that is a stretch considering James Harden, gained 50 pounds, got chubby, and decided he wanted to get out of Houston. So that's saying something. He's a better everything. And their games are far too similar. They're both ball-dominant guards. But Kyrie Irving scored 38 points. And that is an issue because it should have been reversed. James Harden should be scoring 38 points and Kyrie should be scoring 19. But what's happening, and what I think will continue to happen, is that James Harden will become third fiddle to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And that is a huge mistake. Because in the playoffs, you need Kyrie Irving to be your third guy. Perhaps he could even be the dagger, the shooter, the guy who's got the ice in his veins, who's going to put a team away in the fourth quarter. But he cannot be your second best player on a championship team. We saw that when he was in Cleveland with LeBron James, but he was with LeBron James, who is perhaps the greatest basketball player of all time. With any other player, Kyrie Irving is not good enough to be the second best player on a championship team. Even Kevin Durant, who I think is the second best player in the NBA currently. Kevin Durant is incredible. And even with just Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, that's not good enough. So they had to go get James Harden. And now they're going to have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, and they will not be the best team in the East. They have defensive issues and a Kyrie Irving issue. They need to trade Kyrie Irving. That's all today for me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can definitely, in fact, I encourage you to share this episode with your friends. I would love for a bench warmer and a brew to be seen by as many people as possible. Leave a like on this video if you're watching on YouTube, and I will see you in the next one.